Um, so picture this. You are at a dinner party,
Okay, setting the scene.
right? And around the table is a former governor, a minister, a PR executive, a couple of authors, and a Berkeley professor.
So a really diverse, high-level group of people.
Exactly. It's a mix of men and women, including several very prominent progressive feminist thinkers,
Mm.
and someone casually poses a thought experiment to the table. They ask, if you were born today, which would you rather be, a boy or a girl?
And the answers they got were, well, surprisingly unanimous and quite telling, honestly. Every single man at the table answered, a girl.
Wow.
Yeah, and most of the women did too.
When they kind of pushed past the initial shock of that consensus to figure out why, the feeling in the room was just palpable. The prevailing thought was that today, girls could grow up to be whatever they want to be, but boys seem to be, fundamentally struggling to figure out their place in the world.
Right, which is a complete inversion of the historical narrative. I mean, for centuries, across almost all cultures, parents overwhelmingly preferred their firstborn to be a son.
Yeah,
That was the standard.
exactly. But today, the demographic data shows that preference has flipped entirely. Dads to be in modern Western societies are almost twice as likely to say they prefer a daughter over a son.
That dinner party anecdote actually comes from our source material today, which is a fascinating set of excerpts from a book called The Boy Crisis by Dr. Warren Farrell and Dr. John Gray.
It's an incredible read.
It really is. So we are taking a deep dive into what the authors describe as a silent, multifaceted crisis affecting the mental, physical, economic, and educational health of boys.
We're basically going to explore why society has this massive blind spot to their suffering.
Yes, and ultimately how we can help the boys and men in our lives redefine their sense of purpose. Because whether you are, raising a son, navigating the modern dating world, managing a team, or you're just curious about the shifting cultural tectonic plates beneath our feet, this really reframes the reality facing men and boys today.
So to start, the first layer to uncover here is the raw data on physical and mental health. The authors describe it as an invisible iceberg, meaning most of it is submerged, right?
Exactly. But the numbers we actually can see are staggering. So the suicide rate for boys and men is 3.5 times higher than it is for women.
3.5 times. That is incredibly grim.
It is. To put that in perspective, the National Academy of Sciences reports that the recent increase in mortality among white males, which is largely driven by suicide and substance abuse, has taken as many lives as the entire AIDS epidemic.
I mean, that really highlights the scale.
Yeah.
We are losing an unfathomable number of men to sheer despair.
Absolutely.
And the text points out that this despair doesn't always just turn inward in, quiet, isolated ways.
No, sometimes it explodes outward. The authors actually draw a direct line between this mental health crisis and the tragedy of mass shootings.
Yeah, they frame these events largely as a form of murder-suicide, right?
Yes, exactly. They see it as a devastating endpoint to a boy's profound isolation. These young men feel entirely unloved, unneeded, and invisible, and they just drive off a psychological cliff, taking others with them.
It's a chilling way to look at it. And then there is the institutional of the crisis. Because if these young men aren't dying by suicide or violence, they are being locked away.
The incarceration numbers are wild.
They really are. Since the 1970s, the U.S. has seen a 700% increase in its prison population.
700%.
Yeah, and the U.S. holds roughly 5% of the global population, but almost 25% of the world's prisoners. But the crucial demographic detail here, the one the book focuses on, is that 93% of those prisoners are male.
And we tend to look at that purely as a crime issue, right? Or a policy failure.
Right, like a failing of the justice system.
Exactly. But the source material asks us to look at it as a profound failure of male socialization and mental health. When boys lack a legitimate path to respect and purpose, or, when they are raised without strong, positive father figures to guide that intense energy, they act out.
They find respect in gangs or illegal economies.
Exactly. We are essentially using the prison system to jail our way out of a crisis of male development.
And the physical toll on men is just as severe, driven by that same underlying stress. The authors note that men suffer from lower life expectancies across 14 of the 15 leading causes of death.
And there's also a remarkable biological indicator of this environmental and physiological stress, which is sperm counts.
Oh, right. The drop is huge.
It's massive. They have dropped by 50% compared to the generation of these boys' grandfathers, and they continue to drop about 1.5% every single year.
That is wild. And, when boys feel this immense pressure to measure up to traditional, often impossible ideals of masculinity, while their actual opportunities are shrinking, they develop these incredibly destructive coping mechanisms.
Right. The book is a great example of this. It contrasts two friends, Jonathan and Austin, who represent opposite sides of the exact same coin.
Yeah, let's talk about Jonathan first.
So Jonathan suffers from what the authors call bigorexia.
Muscle dysmorphia.
Exactly. He was a smaller kid, constantly compared to his older brother, who looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger. So to avoid feeling small and vulnerable, Jonathan starts obsessively lifting weights, taking extreme supplements, and eventually abusing steroids.
He's basically trying to build literal physical armor to cover a deep psychological wound.
Yes. And the tragedy is that society actively encourages that specific dysfunction. Because our culture equates male value with physical strength and muscle, Jonathan's parents and friends were completely blind to his suffering.
They just praised his dedication.
Right. They didn't see the steroid abuse, they just saw a young man conforming to a masculine ideal.
But then his friend Austin took the opposite path. Austin realized he could never compete in that intense physical arena, so he just retreated entirely. He checked out of the physical world, retreating into video games and overeating, which led to severe obesity and depression.
So one built a shell of muscle, the other built a shell of fat. But both were hiding from the intense pressures of male expectations.
It really makes me think about how we frame workplace struggles, because we talk constantly about the glass ceiling, right?
Right, the invisible systemic barrier holding women back from the very top of the corporate ladders.
Exactly. But the sources describe what looks like a glass cellar for men at the very bottom. The text highlights these death professions: roofers, loggers, oil rig workers, coal miners.
Jobs where 92% of all workplace fatalities happen.
Yeah, and they were filled almost exclusively by men.
Well, for generations, men who lacked access to higher education relied on their physical muscle to provide. They willingly take on massive physical risk to secure what the authors call the death profession's bonus.
But they're trading their safety for a paycheck.
Exactly. Society has explicitly told men that their inherent worth is tied directly to their ability to provide financially for a family. So if they cannot provide safely, they will literally risk their lives to do it. They trade their physical safety for a sense of value.
But the global economy has kind of pulled the rug out from under that bargain, right? I mean, we have fundamentally transitioned from an economy based on muscle to an economy based on microchips.
Yes. The mind is the premium currency now. And the physical strength that men historically leveraged is just becoming obsolete.
Which brings us to the educational collapse, because this is the mechanism driving so much of this economic displacement. The education system is leaving boys behind at a staggering rate.
The stats on this are pretty shocking. By the 8th grade, 41% of girls are proficient in writing, compared to only 20% of boys.
Half as many.
Right. And the modern classroom environment, which, requires sitting still for long hours, heavily emphasizes verbal skills and has dramatically reduced physical recess. It often treats natural boyish energy as a pathology rather than a learning style.
And that structural disadvantage just compounds over time. Look at college graduation rates. A few decades ago, young men were the clear majority of college graduates. Today, it is a complete inversion. Boys are now projected to earn only 39% of college degrees.
And this creates a devastating cascade effect that the authors call the dropout, left out cycle.
How does that cycle work exactly?
Well, a boy struggles in a classroom not built for him. He falls behind and eventually drops out or simply stops striving. Without an education in a microchip economy, he becomes unemployed or severely underemployed.
And because he is underemployed, he is deemed undateable.
Exactly. He gets left out of the economy and consequently left out of marriage and fatherhood.
Now, I know some of you listening are probably thinking, wait, women make their own money now. They don't need a man's paycheck, so surely this expectation is fading, right?
I'd think so.
But the statistics the book provides on modern dating are just brutal. They note that 75% of women say they would not date an unemployed man.
And 72% of women still expect the man to pay the full bill on a first date.
Yeah, the book jokingly calls the modern dating dynamic, every kiss begins with K or pay.
Which is funny, but also kind of sad. But the authors argue this is not just a slight cultural hangover that will vanish in a generation. They say it is deeply hardwired evolutionary psychology.
Right, because for the vast majority of human history, a woman's survival and the survival of her offspring depended entirely on partnering with a man who had the competence and resources to act as a provider and protector.
Exactly. Women are evolutionarily programmed to seek out those traits because, historically, failing to do so meant starvation or death.
So even if a modern woman earns a fantastic salary and doesn't logically need a man's resources, that ancient wiring is still whispering in the background, unemployed equals danger.
And men feel the weight of this acutely. Failing to meet the standard of the provider doesn't just make a young man feel poor, it makes him feel fundamentally unlovable.
Like if he cannot pay, he feels he cannot play in the game of life.
Precisely. So the question then becomes, if the suicide rates are skyrocketing, if boys are falling out of the education system, and if this economic shift is leaving them utterly isolated in this dropout left-out cycle, why isn't this front-page news every single day?
That is the million-dollar question. And the text calls this the gender empathy gap. We seem to have a massive historical blind spot when it comes to male suffering.
We really do. Historically, for a society or a tribe to survive, it needed its boys to be willing to die.
Right.
It had to be willing to die in wars to protect the perimeter, or die in dangerous environments to secure resources. So to facilitate this, society developed what the authors call heroic intelligence.
This is the socialization of boys to embrace risking their lives for the good of the group,
Exactly.
which is the exact opposite of health intelligence, where we socialize someone to live a long, safe, healthy life. We literally had to train ourselves as a culture to care a little bit less about male suffering.
Right, because if mothers and fathers were completely paralyzed by the fear of losing their sons, they wouldn't send them off to fight the invading army. We had to honor them as heroes, to essentially bribe them into disposability.
We traded honor for their lives.
Yeah.
It's like society treated men as the white blood cells of the community. A white blood cell's entire biological purpose is to be deployed to the edge of the wound, fight the infection, and die off to keep the larger body safe.
That's a really powerful analogy.
But in the modern world, we don't have as many dragons to slay. We don't have constant physical invasions or frontiers to conquer. So these white blood cells don't know what to do, and they're turning on themselves.
It's an autoimmune crisis.
Yes, exactly.
And you can actually track the erosion of this societal bargain, this loss of the heroic bribe through history. The book uses the evolution of the U.S. military draft poster as a visual timeline of the empathy gap.
Oh, this part was fascinating.
Right. So in the early 20th century, you had the classic Uncle Sam poster, "I want you for U.S. Army."
Very inspiring.
Deeply inspiring. It made a young man feel needed, chosen, and heroic.
But then you move to the late 20th century during the Vietnam draft era. The poster changed to a tough-looking guy in a T-shirt with his arms crossed, and the slogan was, "A man's got to do what a man's got to do."
The message shifted from inspiration and honor to sheer begrudging obligation.
Yeah. And finally, look at the modern-day draft registration poster. It is highly bureaucratic, sterile, and almost contemptuous. It simply features 3 instructional boxes. Read it, fill it, mail it.
Wow. Just do the paperwork.
Exactly. The authors point out that the modern message strips away the heroism entirely. It essentially tells young men, your body still belongs to the state if we need it, but we aren't going to pretend you're a hero for it anymore.
And young men feel this purpose void deeply. They are expected to take on the burdens of traditional masculinity without any of the historical honor or economic viability that used to make the bargain worth it.
And we are already seeing large-scale global reactions to this void. The text spends time looking at Japan as a fascinating preview of where this all leads.
Yeah, Japanese youth culture is manifesting this crisis in real time. For decades, Japanese men were driven by a corporate culture of extreme, punishing overwork known as karoshi.
Which translates to death by overwork, right?
Literally, yes. Fathers functioned primarily as financial wombs. They were entirely absent from the home, working themselves to the bone to provide.
And the younger generation of boys looked at their fathers, saw the reality of karoshi, and simply said, no thanks. They're rationally rejecting a system that kills them.
And so they have become what Japanese media derisively called soshoku danshi, or herbivore men.
Herbivore men.
Yeah, these are young men who are checking out of the traditional rat race entirely. They are completely apathetic about career climbing, dating, sex, and marriage. They retreat to their parents' homes and just live quiet, disconnected lives.
Because they haven't failed at the traditional male purpose, they've actively opted out of it because they see it as a lethal, unrewarding bargain. So if the old warrior and sole provider roles are obsolete or, leading straight to karoshi, we have to figure out how to guide boys out of this purpose void without them retreating into herbivore status.
Right, and the author suggests the only way forward is to fundamentally redefine what it means to be a successful man.
Yes, and the text introduces this great concept called the glint in the eye.
I love this part.
Me too. If you look at our grandfathers and great-grandfathers, many of them had a personal passion, a hobby, an artistic talent, maybe a deep love for nature. That was the glint in their eye.
But historically, a good man was expected to suppress his personal glint, to take a high-stress, often dangerous, but reliable job to provide for his family. He traded his personal passion for a new glint, ensuring the physical survival of his children.
He gave up what he loved doing for the people he loved being with. But today, the paradigm is different. Women are out in the workforce, they are highly educated, and they are entirely capable of being economic providers.
Right, so boys need a new sense of purpose that isn't solely tied to being a paycheck, because that role is no longer exclusively theirs.
And the book uses the story of John Lennon to illustrate this shift.
Which is such a perfect example, because John Lennon was at the absolute pinnacle of traditional male success. He had the ultimate glint as a member of the Beatles. He had global fame, unimaginable wealth, adulation.
Yet he walked away from the music industry for 5 years to be a full-time stay-at-home father to his second son, Sean.
And Lennon later said it was the best decision of his life. With his first son, Julian, he had been entirely focused on earning love through his career, his providing, and his success.
By staying home with Sean, he discovered the part of himself that could simply be love. He shifted his entire identity from being a provider-protector to being a nurturer-connector.
He found a new, profound purpose that had nothing to do with external achievement or economic provision.
Okay, but I have to push back on this a bit, though.
Sure, go ahead.
It is very easy to pull a John Lennon and just walk away from work to be a full-time dad when you have literal Beatle money in the bank.
Fair point.
For the average guy listening to this who is struggling to pay rent and keep the lights on, telling him to just be loved sounds a bit disconnected from economic reality.
Oh, absolutely. And the authors validate that economic reality. Obviously, not every family can afford to have a parent quit their job, regardless of gender. But the financial status of John Lennon isn't the core lesson here.
So what is the takeaway then?
The point is the psychological permission his story represents. We need to give average men the societal permission to view active, empathetic fatherhood and emotional connection as a valid, heroic life purpose.
Right. So instead of a young man thinking, I am only a valuable man if I make 6 figures and pay for everything, he can think, I am a successful man because I am deeply connected to my family, I am an equal partner, and I am raising resilient children.
Exactly. If a man wants to be a stay-at-home dad while his wife works, or if he wants to take a lower-paying job that allows him to be home at 5 p.m. every day, society shouldn't view him as a failure or a herbivore.
He should be viewed as fulfilling a vital role.
Right. We need to honor the nurturer connector just as highly as we used to honor the warrior protector. The goal is to detach male worth from pure economic output.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today. We started by mapping out the physical and mental iceberg threatening modern boys, the alarming suicide rates, the incarceration pipeline, and the educational shifts, leaving them behind in a microchip economy.
We also explored the historical gender empathy gap that trained us to ignore male pain so we could send them into danger, and how the loss of that heroic bargain has left this huge purpose void.
And we looked at how redefining masculinity, moving away from the idea of men as disposable heroes or walking ATMs, and towards seeing them as empathetic connectors can actually fill that void.
It's a huge shift in perspective.
It really is. And a core takeaway from the text that really resonates is this: helping boys doesn't mean taking anything away from girls. We are all in the same family boat. If the men and boys on one side of the boat are sinking, the whole boat goes down. We have to address this together.
I completely agree. And I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to mull over. It builds on a fascinating piece of research mentioned in the text. Generally, society accepts it as a hard biological fact that girls and women naturally display higher emotional intelligence and empathy than men.
We definitely treat it as an immutable difference.
We do. But the researchers decided to test that assumption. They conducted a study where they actually paid or socially incentivized boys and men to accurately assess the feelings of others.
And what happened?
The empathy gap completely vanished. When men were placed in an environment where they were actually valued and rewarded for empathy, they were just as deeply empathetic as the women. So I pose this question to you. If a boy's capacity for deep emotional connection magically appears the moment society actually values and rewards it, what other hardwired gender traits in both men and women are actually just illusions waiting for us to change the reward system?
It really makes you wonder how much of what we think is nature is actually just what we've chosen to nurture. Brings us right back to that dinner party. If we can change the reward system to value the health and emotional connection of boys as much as their economic output, maybe the next time someone asks, would you rather be a boy or a girl born today? The answer won't be so one-sided. Maybe it'll just be a choice between two equally beautiful, purposeful paths.